Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. The sprint race at the Austrian Grand Prix is over. Max Verstappen is on pole for Sunday's Grand Prix, but it's certainly not without incident because both Ferraris were closing in on the end, especially Charles Leclerc. Is there potentially a tyre overheating problem for Verstappen that might cause some issues for Red Bull tomorrow in the race? But also Hamilton had a rather frustrating afternoon, stuck behind the two Hasses, but apparently damage on the first lap could have been one of the reasons why the pace wasn't quite there in the sprint race. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. Really upset the channel, plenty to dive into today. First of all, of course, Mercedes had to work incredibly hard overnight to actually fix the two cars that were damaged in both crashes in qualifying. Of course, well, it seems like they might have done something with their plank because it seems like an entirely new plank they've put on the bottom of the car here. Of course, the present rumour is that Red Bull and Ferrari are using two different pieces of this plank to help it flex further towards the back than it does to the front to potentially give them some degree of advantage. Mercedes might have been trying to do the same thing right here, as you can kind of see with this image. It seems like they've kind of, put two different pieces of this plank together on the underside of the car. Certainly an interesting one if they have actually decided to do this, because it's something which is going to get outlawed, we believe, from the Belgian Grand Prix, but maybe that's their attempt to try and make things a little bit more interesting at the top of the pecking order, but certainly did not seem to help them at all in their pace today. They, of course, fixed the cars. Things might be slightly different and whatever, and well, some reasons explaining why Hamilton had a hard time getting past the Hasses as well, we shall see here in a second. Talk about free practice 2 real quick, the final practice session of the weekend. Sainz, Leclerc, Verstappen, P1, P2, P3. No one really cares about these practice sessions though, just because quality's already done. There's nothing really to go for here in terms of pace. It's just, drive around a little bit, get the feel for the car and potentially any setup changes they might want to do ahead of the sprint. This also was keenly of note though. This was kind of through the speed trap, the top speeds of each particular car. Red Bull at fastest 322 up there with Williams. Actually, it's Mercedes and Haas, both teams that were kind of challenging right here for, the last points placings in the sprint race were the slowest cars through the speed trap. Interesting really, because Mercedes were not, of course, on the level of Red Bull or Ferrari back at Silverstone, but they did seem to be closer in straight line speeds. And this race seemingly a different story yet again. And even despite Haas being down here, Schumacher was just out dragging Hamilton in a straight line with DRS open on the back straight there, on when Hamilton was trying to make the move a lot of the time during the race. So definitely interesting that Mercedes' car does not seem to be particularly aerodynamically aligned. And even Toto Wolff admitted after the race that their car is still just too draggy for what they want to achieve, while challenging it for the podium positions, which might not be the case this weekend based on what we saw today. That is the thing with the sprint race. It kind of shows you what you're going to get on Sunday. There's no real questions yet to be answered. We kind of know the pace of the cars, but there is still some interesting things going on here. Now, look, Mercedes had to change a few things around, but all allowed by the regulations. And let's talk about the start of the race. I do feel bad, man, for Fernando Alonso. This guy has had to deal with so much bad luck so far this season, and it's happened again, right? He spends all this time before the race kind of preparing his side of the grid, being very optimistic, and then just as they're about to put away for the formation lap, the team leaves his tyre warmers on, the tyre blankets on, and everyone was thinking, well, not everyone was thinking, but people were wondering, okay, have they just forgotten to take them off? Is it just embarrassing from Alpine? But I think it was still jacked up the car, and they realised there was some sort of issue with it, so before they even get away, they have to effectively retire the car from the session, and Alonso will start from the back of the grid tomorrow. That's going to be tough, because there's certainly going to be DRS trains ahead of him that he's going to have a difficult time navigating, I'm sure about it. So that was tough. Also, guanyu as well had a brief issue before the race began as well. Alonso, of course, the bad luck continues from him, and even mentioned here that he reckons so far this year they've lost 50 or 60 points based on just, difficult situations, and there's certainly been a few times where that's happened so far. So yeah, Alonso versus Alpine, Leclerc versus Ferrari, two battles this season that no one's really talking about, to be honest, the frustration that those drivers are having with their team. And also it's Zhou Guanyu versus the Ferrari engine, which still seems to be causing him some issues. The engine just turns off inexplicably here. They have to do another formation lap, and eventually it's okay, and they get away cleanly. Now, an interesting start to the race here, actually, because Gasly decided that he'd seen exactly what Russell did at the Silverstone Grand Prix, cutting across, squeezing Gasly into a bit of a sandwich, and then sending Zhou off into the distance. Pretty much Gasly just copied and pasted that same move here, but this time he's in Russell's seat. A kind of incredible incident, because Albon's on the inside, gets a great start here with the soft tyres ahead of Hamilton, and then Gasly comes around the outside, squeezes Hamilton completely, and Hamilton has nowhere to go, and there's a pretty big contact on the front right tyre here for Hamilton. I want to see surprised that there wasn't more damage at Hamilton's car, because it could have certainly been a puncture, if not worse, or front wing damage or whatever. Anyway, Gasly gets effectively flipped up and goes off the track. Eventually he recovers it to, I believe, finish ahead of Tsunoda, which is rather impressive, but still, I think this, if last week's was Russell's fault, this was Gasly's fault. And look, going into turn one, it's always always going to be a mess. But like with last week, maybe Gasly here took a bit too much of a risk. And it does seem, based on what Total Wolf said, that there actually was some damage here to Hamilton's car, which did hold him back in terms of pace in the race. But really, it was the straight line speed where Hamilton did seem to be struggling. Now, well, the Ferraris, after Verstappen gets away relatively cleanly, establishes quite quickly a 3-second lead. The Ferraris were battling it outright. Sainz was saying to Leclerc, look, I'm still here to play. I'm not messing around. Like, yeah, I still want to be able to win this championship and be the #1 driver for the team. They were battling it out there, swapping places. It was great to watch, but they were leaving Russell in the dust as well. And that's certainly of note also that the Mercedes did not seem to have the pace today compared to where they were in qualifying, which is certainly a rarity for them so far this season. I'm sure the overnight repairs haven't necessarily helped either, but Verstappen kind of drove away into the distance for a little bit. And then this was kind of the key incident, really. This was the only thing that made this race interesting at all, to be perfectly honest, was that the fact that Hamilton was trying to chase down the Hasses. Now, Perez took advantage of when Schumacher was actually fighting Magnussen. They had a bit of a tussle going into, I think, turn 3, the very slow right-hander, and Perez was able to sneak down the inside, take Schumacher, and then, of course, after that, getting past Magnussen with DRS wasn't going to be too much of an issue. But when both of them are like this in a DRS train, so difficult for Hamilton to do anything because the DRS is not so powerful this year, and also with Schumacher getting in front of him, there was barely anything he could do. He was getting on, he was on Schumacher's gearbox so many laps in a row, and he was just getting out dragged on the straight. It was kind of frustrating to watch, to be honest, that he couldn't get past these two cars. There was also some drama about this, right? Because, I mean, look, Schumacher made an incredible defense. There were a few situations where I thought Hamilton had him, but Schumacher just positioned his car perfectly. He seems to be on fire lately since his points at Silverstone. He's driving very well indeed, looking like the good old days, really, of Michael Schumacher in the Mercedes versus Hamilton in the McLaren back in the day. But Schumacher was not happy at all, right? After the race, he was actually seething, visibly seething, that the team hadn't let him through. He felt like he had faster pace than the Magnussen, should have been let past, as it turns out, of course, because Mick was defending very hard. Maybe his tyres went off the boil a little bit, and eventually Magnussen pulls away outside of the 1-second gap, to which point Hamilton gets the DRS and Schumacher doesn't, and then eventually Hamilton's able to get past on pretty much the final lap of the race, at which point he's got no time to catch up further up the road. So probably a kind of strategical error there, really, from the guys on the Haas side, because if they'd have, well, kept Magnussen slower, then Mick would have still got DRS. Hamilton probably wouldn't have been able to get past at all. And it was actually mentioned right here by Victor that the team told Kevin to slow down and keep Mick within a DRS range, but the lap before he got told he was a 1:10.8, the lap after he was a 1:10.6, so he didn't slow down at all, and well, it certainly didn't help Schumacher keep the place, and Hamilton manages to just about get the final point on offer here, because effectively the way it works is 8 points go to the first place driver, the 8th place driver gets 1 point, no one else gets any points from the sprint race. That's how it works nowadays. But Verstappen wins 1.7 seconds ahead of Leclerc. This was rather interesting just because, look, Verstappen controlled the race from start to finish. They all started on medium tyres, these top runners, but Leclerc towards the end was pulling back quite significantly on Verstappen, and Sainz had kind of an early lockup, which probably costed his tyres towards the end of the race. But it did feel like, I was surprised really, that after Verstappen was 3 seconds ahead, about 7 or 8 laps in, I thought he would either extend that lead or maintain that lead or whatever, and it started to slowly come down, and at the end of the race it was only about 1.7 seconds. So Verstappen, I'm sure, was kind of cruising and controlling the race, but that's certainly an interesting talking point there on the tyre wear, which may well come into effect tomorrow if Ferrari, as time goes on, have better tyre wear, because we saw it the other way around back in Imola, where it was the Ferrari that was quick early on, and then their tyres went on the boil and the Red Bulls were a bit better. This could be the other way around, which could, of course, have a part to play in the race itself. Let's talk Mercedes, though. So Toto Wolff gives his thoughts on the situation. He's optimistic about Lewis's pace in the race tomorrow. Says he got brake damage and a suspension damage when Gasly hit him in turn 1. It was quite the hefty instant. I was surprised that there wasn't more visible damage, but yeah, seemingly brake damage, suspension damage was kind of holding Hamilton back. Even then, like, even without these damages, like, it's not like he necessarily had the straight line speed. And I saw a brief snippet of an interview where Toto Wolff did say that their car is just too draggy, like they just don't have the speed in a straight line. And also there's always been this talking point that other engines, like the Mercedes engine generally tends to struggle at the higher altitudes. That might be the case here as well. Like, it just didn't seem like they quite had what it took in a straight line, which is where you're going to get the moves done in general. Like, well, unless you're trying to force other drivers off the track, which sometimes you can get away with apparently nowadays, and sometimes you cannot. So outside of the Mercedes, of course, there is the Ferrari versus Verstappen and the versus the Red Bull battle tomorrow, because Perez made great progress also in the sprint race, got up to P5 in the end, but it was also rather interesting that he was kind of a fair bit back on Russell, but really couldn't close the gap at all on Russell. I guess he probably used up his tyres early on, and that really was the discussion from the Red Bull side, that Verstappen pushed very hard on his tyres early on in the race to establish the advantage, and then he kind of paid for that towards the end of the stint, which of course was kind of the other way around potentially for the Ferrari drivers. But it's not like the Ferrari drivers weren't battling hard early on and using a lot of tyre wear, because, I mean, look, they were battling very hard indeed. So definitely does raise an interesting in question, that if this week ends, the pace is there as the stint goes on for Ferrari. Could they do some serious damage, right? Who knows how the race plays out tomorrow, but I honestly thought after the way the first 7-8 laps were going to go, that Verstappen was going to win this sprint race by 6+ seconds. Turns out it was 1.5, and honestly, if Leclerc and Sainz hadn't battled so hard early on, they probably lost a good second or so in that battle they had. If Leclerc had gone ahead and stayed ahead, the gap at the end to Verstappen could have been something in the, under a second effectively, based on what we saw early on. So I think that was a realistic possibility, and Leclerc even says, yes, we were quick, we can get them tomorrow, we just need to stay calm in the first part of the race and not fight, because I was saving in the first few laps. So rather interesting, right? He was saving his tyres, worked out, well, for him better as time progressed. I guess, look, Verstappen can learn from that tomorrow and say, okay, fair enough, maybe I did push my tyres a bit too hard in the first few laps, and then that cost me down the line. So it does give both teams and drivers a good opportunity to do something going into tomorrow as well. But Perez, honestly, a great drive from him. I saw the onboard of Perez when he was fighting Hamilton, because of course Hamilton had he would have probably been in a better position in Hamilton, but couldn't really hold position because of the impact and kind of threw him offline and everything. And Perez and Hamilton were wheel to wheel going down that second straight. It was honestly phenomenal to see. But yeah, the overall looks like this. The starting order tomorrow will be Verstappen, Leclerc, Sainz, Russell, Perez, Ocon, Magnussen, Hamilton. Could be good news for Hamilton that he got past one of the Hasses, because there shouldn't theoretically be any DRS trains in front of him here. Slightly better day for McLaren, getting up to P11, P12 after all is said and done. But again, yeah, some drivers with some pretty bad luck, and Gasly even gets above Tsunoda, and Albon gets a time penalty that we may talk about in another video very shortly. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new as always, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.